Welcome to All Pro Football Data. My name is Jim Coburn. In today's episode, we're going to be evaluating the Cleveland Browns 2024 NFL draft class based on data, production, athleticism, and other statistical factors to kind of see how the Browns did this year in this draft. Stay tuned until the end of the video where I reveal what the final grade is for the Browns. But before that, you need to learn about how I grade draft classes. I grade draft classes a lot different than everybody else. I grade them based on draft pick approximate value. So, draft pick approximate value is what the average value is per pick based on historical data. So, this is based on every single draft pick since 1994 in terms of what the average AV is per draft pick. So most picks between 1 to 5 average 98.84 in terms of their approximate value score. Meaning if you randomly pick the player, either picks 1 through 5, every single draft class from now until 2000, well not 2000, but 1994, you would have a player that is a 98 percentile prospect at the position if you just randomly selected in that area. This is important to know because it tells you what is expected. What are the expectations for those picks, if you will? And based on that, you can see with their data grade whether or not they're going to meet those expectations or not. Because data grades show if a prospect has the potential to outperform his draft status and also if he's able to meet the expectations from his draft. So if you want to learn more about the data grades that I use, the correlations, all that kind of stuff, go to my top 50 prospect video, which is if you just Google top 50 prospects Jim Coburn, that'll pull that video right up and it'll go over the correlations and everything else like that about the data grade. But the data grade is essentially this. It's EAV, or expected approximate value grade, also known as a ceiling grade. This number takes a look at production, athleticism, strength of schedule, strength of team, age, all those other factors all combined into one number, which gives you their potential at the next level based on data. Now, typically, prospects that score 70 or higher in terms of their data grade have the best chance for starter outcomes. And this is pretty much at every position that you could think of. You typically 80% or more of the long-term starters were typically 70 or higher. So that's the number that you want them to hit. Anything lower than that, you start to get a little bit risky. There's less of a shot of them making it. And anything in the bottom 50 percentile, below 50 percentile, 40 percentile, 30 percentile, 20 percentile, the chances are extremely low for them to make it at the next level if they score that low. So this is how I grade draft classes. I look at the positional grade and then I look at the data grade to kind of determine whether or not this player has a chance of meeting the expectation of where they were drafted. Because I think a lot of times people don't understand what the expectation really should be with these draft picks, and that is what all these numbers kind of give you. Now, there are some limiting factors, okay? So these are the things that can affect the data, that can make it less effective, if you will. Things that can affect it that are outside of the control of the data. One of those things is the coaching of a team can affect the development of a player. The publicity of the media market can influence a grade on a player. So you might have a player that becomes an all-pro player just because they're really popular with the media. Because everybody sees them, everybody talks about how great they are, and then they end up getting kind of inflated. Name recognition. There's a lot of players that are going to the Pro Bowl that probably haven't really been playing like Pro Bowl players, but because they were really good for 4 straight seasons, people just keep voting them in. That happens a lot more than you think and can affect what they actually were at the NFL level. Another thing, injuries can be inconsistent in terms of outcomes. If a player gets injured, their career might derail and they may not have the type of career that they should have had because of injury. Psychological and mental makeup can affect things, and substitution bias can also affect things, which allows for the possibility that coaches switch from higher costing prospects to lower costs but lower quality. So teams will often do this when they have to pay a player and they don't really want to pay them. They're a good player, it's just that they don't want to pay them, so they draft a player to replace them who may not be as good, but he'll fit that role and he'll be lesser quality, and he may not really should be starting, but because they need to fill that role, he ends up being the starter, which can affect the numbers as well. So those are examples of things that can kind of affect the data and make it less predictive or effective or mean as much. These are things that affected that are outside of the parameters of it. Now, the Cleveland Browns' needs are this. When you take a look at the Cleveland Browns in terms of NFL AV, which is how they have performed, and you take a look at the data grades for the prospects here, these are the biggest needs that they have. They have a lot of older players on their roster. That's the biggest thing I really noticed with the Cleveland Browns is that they had a lot of really good players like Joel Bitonio, Mari Cooper, Jake Conklin, Dalvin Tomlinson, Wyatt Teller, Zadarius Smith, Jordan Hicks, but they're all older prospects. Denzel Ward, for example, is 27 years old. A lot of cornerbacks start to decline once they get into their late 20s. Myles Garrett is 29. A lot of edge rushers also start to decline when they hit their 30s. So there's a lot of older prospects here that is a little bit concerning. They really are going to need to start having some first round picks to really up their roster out. But this is how I identified their needs for the Browns. They need quarterback, and that's mainly because of the age of Deshaun Watson, and also because his play hasn't exactly been what it really needs to be. So he might improve these numbers this year, but that definitely is a bit of a concern. The running back position is definitely a position of need because of the age of Nick Chubb. Tight end because of the age of Njoku. Offensive line, especially as well. Also on defense, they really need defensive tackle help. That's probably one of their largest needs possible is to get a defensive tackle in there. Edge is okay, linebacker is okay, safety might need a little bit of help and some depth, but this is the overall forced needs of the Browns based on data. Other than that, the biggest factors in terms of final grades, these are the three things I really look at when I grade these teams. Did they meet their roster needs? What were the biggest needs? Defensive tackle, running back, tight end, offensive line, quarterback, and safety are probably what I would identify as the biggest needs. Did they draft good prospects? Because if you draft a bad prospect to fill a need, you're going to end up having to draft another one the next year. So, did they draft good prospects? I define good prospects as players that have a data grade of 70 or higher, because typically most starters are in that range. Anything lower than that is risky. So that's generally how I grade these classes is if they got a prospect that at least hits 70 or higher. Also, did they draft prospects that have the data potential to outperform their draft status? So if you're taking players in the fifth, the sixth, the seventh round, you want them to have high data grades because they have a higher chance of outperforming their round. Most prospects that break out in the fifth, the sixth, the seventh round, or even the fourth round had great data grades. It's just they happened to fall there and they were able to be given an opportunity to start. So that's what you're looking for. You're looking for players that have good data grades. And most players that have below average data grades that are taken in the late rounds don't become anything but filler and camp bodies. So that's just the way the numbers are with that. But anyways, so let's get into their picks. So first off, we have pick 54 and Michael Hall Jr., defensive tackle from Ohio State. His data grade is 70.64 out of 100. His floor is 57.50. Balanced is 64.07. And pick AV is 72.40. The floor grade is the average AV of defensive tackles that tested with a 70 percentile data grade where he was selected at. The balance grade is kind of a combination of his ceiling and his floor, and the pick AV is what's expected of where he was drafted. I would give Michael Hall Jr. a C grade, mainly because his data grade is 70 percentile, so he does have a potential to become a starter, but he definitely is a little bit of a riskier prospect when you look at his data grade compared to what's the average grade for where he was selected for his position. And then, of course, you look at the overall data for him, which is a little concern. There are some concerns here. The biggest thing in terms of is defensive market share data. When you look at defensive market share for Michael Hall Jr., he had a very low solo tackle production score, but he did have above average sacks and above average tackles for loss. Those are good numbers to hit in terms of that area, but overall, he definitely didn't put up the type of market share data that you really want to see from a starting player. Because when you look at the starting defensive tackles, the Pro Bowl and the All Pro defensive tackles, he didn't quite put up those numbers in terms of solo tackles. Now, when you get to his other data, his forced fumble market share, pass deflection market share wasn't really there. He did have above average interception market share, but his other market share numbers weren't really indicative of special outcomes either. Athleticism wise is the one area where he did really well. Might have been why he was drafted so high, honestly. He had a 96 percentile speed score and above average explosiveness for his size. So he has the ability to be a pass rusher in terms of sacks at TFL, and he has good athleticism traits. So he might end up becoming a good kind of a pass rush specialist in terms of the defensive line position there. And when you get to adjusted production traits, the biggest thing that really helps him out is his age. He's a 98 percentile prospect in terms of his age. And even though his production wasn't the best and his overall data wasn't the best as a prospect, typically age can uh, when you get younger prospects that don't produce as well, sometimes they break out. Sometimes they haven't fully developed. So the Browns could develop him into a much better prospect, which is the one biggest positive I can really say about this pick is there is potential there that he may not have been what he could be at the next level yet. What we do know is he's a really good athlete in terms of his 40-yard dash score for his size. So we'll see what the Browns do with him. But that's the biggest thing is he is a bit of a risky prospect because of what he did at Ohio State, but there is some potential because of his age. Then, of course, we get to pick 85 and Zach Zinter, offensive guard out of Michigan. His data grade was 81.37 out of 100. His floor is 71. His balance grade is 76.18. And his pick AV is 57.14. So most picks taken at 85, they usually end up being 57 percentile prospects at the NFL level. His overall pick grade is a B. Taking a look at his athleticism traits, he had an above average speed score, but that was about it. But overall, I would say his overall metrics are physical metrics and stuff like that is indicative of a long-term starter. So that is the rosy expectation for him. He might be more of a rotational guard, if you will, or in that kind of way. But he's there's some good things to him. He's not the best, but there is potential there. Then, of course, we get to pick 156 and Jamari Thrash, wide receiver out of Louisville. His data grade is 69.65 out of 100. His floor is 38.34. His balance grade is 54.14. And his pick AV is 57.14 out of 100. Overall pick grade would be a C. So I'm just going to raise his grade up to a 70 percentile. I mean, I'm just rounding up, if you will, for that. So he definitely would be considered a C. Based on his production traits of why he's a C, is he does have a 90 percentile receiving market share production score with above average total offensive market share and above average touchdown market share. Those are good numbers to have. Efficiency wise, he did have really good yards per reception, but didn't quite have the best in terms of TD percentage at the position. Athleticism wise, he has above average speed, but below average explosiveness and below average flexibility. And his overall age drops his profile down significantly, but he is within the starter averages. My overall feelings on Jamari Thrash is he does have the potential to become a long-term starter. So from that perspective, I do like this pick a lot from that way. I think there is a lot of potential with him. So even though he is a later round pick, he's probably just going to be more of a backup. But I do like the potential that he could become a starter. There is that potential, which is why I gave them a C for his selection there. Then, of course, we get to pick 206 of Nathaniel Watson, linebacker out of Mississippi State. His data grade or ceiling is 67 percentile. His floor grade is 29.60. Balanced is 48.61. And his pick AV is 22.78 out of 100 with an overall pick grade of a D. Taking a look at his other production traits, he had an 86 percentile solo tackle score, 98 percentile in terms of sacks, and 92 percentile in terms of tackle for loss. He was a very productive player, especially when it comes to sacks and TFLs. So look for that. I think he might be used a lot in the Brown scheme as sort of a pass rushing linebacker type, in terms of blitzes and those different kinds of things. In terms of his other data scores, he did really well in terms of forced fumbles, interceptions as well. He was just an all around really productive player at Mississippi State in many ways. And in terms of athleticism, he had a 77 percentile speed score with a below average explosiveness score, which is not exactly where you want him to be in that particular area. And adjusted production wise, his age is he's very old, but he does have a good MSA rating and pass rating, but isn't quite near the starter averages. So he's a little bit of a boomer bust prospect. He was extremely productive at Mississippi State in every single metric you could think of. So he might end up becoming something interesting, but his age definitely does dampen his prospects a little bit. Then, of course, we get to pick 227 and Miles Harden, cornerback out of South Dakota State. His data grader ceiling is 40.11 out of 100. His projected floor is 37.99. His balanced grade is 39.05. And his pick AV is 11.97 out of 100 for overall pick grade of a F. Now, why is it an F? Well, taking a look at his production traits, he had above average solo tackle data with below average interception and below average pass deflection data. Not exactly the numbers that you want to hit. Based on his athleticism traits, he had 89 percentile in terms of flexibility with above average speed and above average explosiveness. So he is a good athlete. So there is the gel there to maybe turn him into something, maybe have him on special teams. But his overall production wasn't really that great, especially when you consider his level of competition, which is probably the biggest issue. So his pass score is so low because he played at South Dakota State and because he had those issues in terms of his production traits. So I think there is some potential with him based on his athleticism traits, but he does have some concerns. And then we get to the last pick for the Cleveland Browns and Jawan Briggs, defensive tackle out of Cincinnati. His data grade is 12.61 out of 100. His projected floor is 25.30 with a balanced grade of 18.96 out of 100. His pick AV is 13.51, and the overall pick grade for him, I would say, is an F based on his overall data. Now, based on his production traits, he basically was an average production guy as a nose tackle prospect. And when you look at the starter averages, the Pro Bowl averages, and the All Pro averages at the defensive tackle or nose tackle position, he doesn't quite hit those numbers that he needs to hit. When you look at his other production traits in terms of forced fumbles, pass deflections, and interceptions, he doesn't hit the numbers he really needs to hit there either. But when you look at his athleticism traits, he was a very good athlete. He had above average, near elite speed, and near elite flexibility for his size, which are all the numbers that you really want to hit for that position. But his adjusted production traits are nowhere near the starter averages for the position. So I would say he's closer to sort of a backup rotational guy than somebody that could end up becoming a starter, even though he is a really good athlete. Overall, my final grade for the Browns, unfortunately, I don't like to say it, I would give them an F. Did they meet all of their roster needs? I would say yes and no. They had a lot of risky prospects. And now I understand you didn't have great draft capital. I understand all those things, but the picks they selected are a little scary. They're a little scary, okay? Did they draft good prospects? Yes and no. Did they draft prospects that had the data potential to outperform their draft status? Yes and no. I would say overall, again, I'm not trying to hate on the Browns or anything else like that, but the picks they selected, they could have done better. They really could have. So, based on the overall data, I would say that make sure to check out my Patreon page at patreon.com/jcoburn. Also, check out my ex, formerly known as Twitter account at Geometrics. And with all that stuff out of the way, thank you guys so much for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe, and tell me how you feel about the Browns draft class this year. And I'll see you guys later. Peace.